Hello, Bravs. We've got a very interesting book. Never mind the train that you can hear in the background. This is called The Water World. The publishing date is, I believe, 1886. And then this one, on this title page, it says the author is J. W.C. Jones, but apparently it's also attributed to a Vandervoort, a J.W. or some initials with Vandervoort. So I don't know if that was a nom de plume for Jones or vice versa, but this is the 1889 Acme Publishing House edition, which is revised and enlarged, only sold by subscription. Obviously, I'm not going to read the entire book, but I am going to go to chapter 20, which has a very interesting section on marine monsters. Let me move this aside. Chapter 20, Marine Monsters. God quickened in the seas and in the rivers so many fishes of so many features, that in the water we may all see creatures, even all that on the earth are to be found, as if the world were in deep waters drowned. For seas as well as skies have sun, moon, and stars, as well as air, swallows, rooks, and stairs, as well as earth, vines, roses, nettles, melons, mushrooms, pinks, gillyflowers, and many millions of other plants, more rare, more strange than these, as very fishes living in the seas, as also rams, calves, horses, hares, and hogs, wolves, urchins, lions, elephants, and dogs, yes, men and maids, in which I most admire the mitred bishop and the cowled friar, of which examples but a few years since were shown the Norway and Polynesian prince du Bartas. Unbounded are the regions of fable, and probably no department of nature is so prolific in supplying food for the wildest fancies of the imagination as the great unfathomed ocean depths, which conceal so many mysteries. The ancients had their sea divinities and monsters in profusion. It is true that the powerful mind of Aristotle, the great father of early philosophy, rejected with disdain the credulous tales and fabulous stories of his age in regard to natural history. But the writings of Pliny, the natural historian, abound in prodigies and absurdities, as also those, and I don't want to rip the page, of Aelian, I don't know how to say it, and other ancient authors. For many centuries, a mist of doubt, error, and fanciful credulity prevailed with regard to the inhabitants of the ocean. Even in 1554, a work on fishes by Rondelet, a physician at Montpellier, although written with tolerable exactitude in some particulars, concludes with a chapter illustrated by grotesque figures of certain marine monsters, among others a fish dressed as a monk and a bishop fish in full pontificals. Where the extraordinary originals from which these cuts were taken came from is not known, but they were probably fabricated in the true Barnum style from the skins of some large species of sharks or rays by the priests of that period to excite the superstitious veneration of the people. Superstitious veneration of the people. And persuade them, as Dupartaz, in the quotation at the head of this chapter, wishes us to believe, that even the sea contains bishops and monks. Until the commencement of the 17th century, nothing like a dawn of true light with regard to natural history seemed to strike upon the popular mind. A laborious but very credulous professor at Bologna, Aldrovandus, wrote no less than 14 folio volumes of the subject, published in 1640, but the true and the false, fable and fact, all are strangely intermixed. Some of the engravings in these books are very curious and give an idea of the exaggerative style of their contents. These we have magnified in every extent by succeeding writers. The Kraken, described by Pontoppidan in his Natural History of Norway, is one of the most extraordinary of these wonderful sea monsters, and claims the peculiar privilege of the wide domain of the Norwegian waters. Our fishermen usually affirm, says the writer, that when they row out several miles to sea, particularly in hot summer days, they are informed by various circumstances that the Kraken is at the bottom of the sea. Sometimes 20 boats get together over him, and when, from well-known indications, they perceive it is rising, they get away as fast as they can. When they find themselves out of danger, they lie upon their oars, and in a few minutes they see the monster come to the surface. He there shows himself sufficiently, though only a small part of his body appears. Its back, which appears to be 1.5 miles in circumference, whoa, looks at first like a number of small islands, surrounded with something which floats like seaweeds. Here and there a large rising is observed like sandbanks. At last several bright points or horns appear, which grow thicker the higher they rise, and sometimes they stand up as high and as large as the masts of middle-sized vessels. It seems these are the creature's arms, and it is said if they were to lay hold of the largest man-of-war, they would pull it down to the bottom. After the monster has been a short time on the water, he begins slowly to sink again, and then the danger is as great as before, because the motion of the sinking causes such a swell and such an eddy or whirlpool that he carries everything before it. Such is the description of the fabulous Kraken. Divested of its supernatural powers and dimensions, there may be some foundations for these exaggerations in the occasional appearances of huge cephalopods, molluscous animals having the head covered with tentacula or feelers serving as feet, to the general characters of which the description given of its form and monstrous arms sufficiently agree. Many such animals are known to exist in some seas, and there are reasons for believing that much larger creatures of the same species exist. It is a favorite notion of Pontoppidan that from the appearance of the Kraken originate those dim traditions of floating islands being observed in the North Seas. It has been sought to identify the cuttlefish of enormous size with the Kraken, and stories are told of men having been drawn over the sides of vessels by their enormous arms. In 1834, Captain Neal of the ship Robertson of Greenock saw the head and snout of a great sea monster, of which a sketch was taken at the time. It appeared like a vessel lying on her beam ends. The Robertson was hauled up so as to near it, and it was discovered to be the head and snout of a great fish swimming to windward. Immediately above the water, its eye was seen like a large deep hole. The part of the head which was above the water measured about 12 feet, and its width 25 feet. The snout was about 50 feet long, and the sea occasionally rippled over one part, leaving other parts dry and uncovered. Several records exist in Scotland of the appearance of similar animals to that which have been noticed, but the result appears to infer the existence of some enormous cuttlefish possessed of characters which distinguish it essentially from every other creature with which we are familiar. Pliny's vast animal, with prodigious arms, which impeded the navigation of the Straits of Gibraltar, would seem to have had a family likeness to the Kraken. The great sea serpent appears to have some analogy to the same monster as we have described, and here again the sapient Pontoppidan raises our eyes in astonishment at his description, and I'm sure I butchered his name twice or thrice. The astonishment at his description of this marine prodigy, which he describes as 600 feet in length, lying in the water in many folds, and appearing like hogsheads, floating in a line at a considerable distance from each other. Such a creature is said to have been seen on the coast of Norway in 1819, for a whole month, seeming to doze in the sunbeams. In 1822 and 1837, it is said to have reappeared in the same waters. Our sailors, not to be outdone by the Norwegians, relate several cases in which prodigious sea serpents have been seen in the Atlantic, opinions varying as to the length of the animal, averaging from 80 feet to 250 yards, making curves perpendicular to the water and with eyes brilliant and glistening. British sailors have also their account in the prodigy witnessed in 1848 in the South Atlantic Ocean, not far from the coast of Africa, by the officers and crew of HMS Daedalus. According to the account forward to the Admiralty, the animal was seen not in bright and fine weather, but with a murky atmosphere and with the long ocean swell. It was swimming rapidly, and with its head and neck above water, and appeared an enormous serpent, with head and shoulders kept about 4 feet constantly above the surface of the sea. It passed so close under the lee quarter of the vessel that its features were easily recognized. The diameter of the serpent was about 15 or 16 inches behind the head, and the animal was never, during the 20 minutes that it continued in sight, once below the surface of the water. The color was dark brown with yellowish white about the throat. It had no fins, but something like a mane, like the mane of a horse, or rather a bunch of seaweed washed about its neck. England's great anatomist, Dr. Owen, has expressed much doubt as to the existence of a great sea serpent, on the ground that no bones or other remains of such recent animal have been found. Notwithstanding this high authority, it may be, however, that many animals in the ocean depths of this character are still unknown to us. It has been supposed that large fishes of the ribbon family may have given rise to some of these stories about the great sea serpent. One was lately captured at the Bermudas, apparently an immature fish, but more than 16 feet in length, and with a long row of flexible filaments or slender threads on the back of the head and anterior parts of the back, which might well represent the mane alluded to as an appendage of the serpent prodigy. The fishes of this kind are inhabitants of great depths in the ocean, and this may account for the rarity of their appearance. One species belongs to the northern seas, where the appearance... These pages are so thick. I mean, they're gilded, so that does add thickness, but they just feel like 2 or 3 pages thick. Of the sea serpent has been particularly recorded. Others belong to the warmer regions. It may be that these fishes attain to a length that would corroborate the assertions of those who have seen the sea serpent. Making a due allowance for exaggeration under such novel circumstances, Mr. Adams, naturalist of the English ship Samarang, writing of Sulu and the Molucca archipelagos, remarks, I have often witnessed the phenomenon which first gave origin to the marvelous stories of the great sea serpent, namely lines of rolling porpoises resembling a long string of buoys, often extending 100 yards. These account for the so-named protuberances of the serpent's back. They keep in close single file, progressing rapidly along the surface of the water by a succession of leaps, part only of their uncouth forms appearing to the eye. The belief in mermaids and mermen, prevalent through the remotest ages, was also especially strong in the Scandinavian countries, and some traces of the delusions still linger on some of the out-of-the-way coasts of the northern seas. coast of the northern seas. A very high antiquity is claimed for these mythic creatures. Ancient history abounds with notices of them. One was called by the Babylonians Otacon and is regarded as identical with Dagon, the national god of the Philistines, so frequently mentioned in the scriptures. It is always represented on medals as half fish and half woman, but the Hebrew writers speak of it as a masculine being. In the excavations of Khorsabad, Bata found a figure of Oduns, or Odunus, a creature half man and half fish. At the excavations at Nimrod, Mr. Layard discovered a gigantic figure with a fish's head as a cap, and the body of the fish depending over the shoulders. On the coins of Ascalon is figured a goddess above whose head is a half moon, and at her feet a woman with her lower extremities like a fish. It is singular how the prevalence of the tales of mermaids exists among Celtic nations, indicating these water nymphs as having been originally deities of the people. The Peruvians had also their semi-fish gods. These form the types of those imaginary creatures, the subjects of ancient poetry. The Tritons, who were represented as half men and half fish, having power to calm tempests, and probably too of the sirens, whose songs were said to lure the unhappy seamen to destruction. Innumerable are the stories that are told of mermaids and mermen. They have been made the subject of numberless songs by ancient and modern bards. Shakespeare alludes to the vocal powers of these mythic creatures. I heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath that the rude sea grew civil at her song. Laureate inquires, who would be a mermaid fair, singing alone, combing her hair under the sea, in a golden curl, with a comb of pearl on a throne? In the Speculum Regale, an Icelandic work of the 12th century, is the following description of a mermaid. A monster is seen also near Greenland, like a woman as far down as the waist, long hands and soft hair, the neck and head in all respects like that of a human being. The hands seem to people to be long, and the fingers not to be parted, but united by a web like that on the feet of water birds. From the waist downwards this monster resembles a fish, with scales, tail, and fin. This prodigy is supposed to show itself more especially before heavy storms. The habit of this creature is to dive frequently, and rise again to the surface with fishes in its hands. When sailors see it playing with the fish or throwing them toward the ship, they fear they are doomed to lose several of the crew. But when it casts the fish, or turning from the vessel flings them away from her, the sailors take it as a good omen that they will not suffer loss in an impending storm. The monster has a very horrible face with broad brow and piercing eyes, a wide mouth and double chin. Hey, sounds like me. Many of the so-called mermaids exhibited in a stuffed condition from time to time have proved sometimes clever, but more frequently bungling, shams. Among the latter may be classed the exhibitions of the famous P.T. Barnum, a few years since, which proved to be the combination of the head of a monkey with the tail of a fish. The probability is that all the stories about these prodigies have originated in the appearance of seals, walruses, to which we have already alluded, and to what are called the herbivorous cetacea, from their living on sea plants, in which consists among others of the manatee of the West Indies, the dugong of the eastern seas, and the stellaris, an inhabitant of the polar regions. The best known species of the manatee or sea cow is found in the West Indies and on the western coast of tropical America. These sometimes attain a length of 20 feet and a weight of 3 or 4 tons, and they live chiefly in shallow bays and creeks and in the estuaries of rivers. The skin is very thick and strong and is almost destitute of hair. The fingers can be readily felt in the swimming paws, and connected together as they are, possess considerable power of motion. Whence the name manatee from the Latin manus, a hand. This animal is usually found in herds, which combine for mutual protection when attacked, placing the young in the center. When one is struck with a harpoon, the others try to tear it out. Tear it out? Tear it out. The females show great affection for their young. The dugong, numbers of which frequent the coasts of Ceylon, allured by the still waters and abundance of seaweeds, is perhaps one of the most likely representatives of what is considered a mermaid that can be found. There is a rude approach to the human outline in the shape and attitude of the mother dugong while suckling her young, holding it to her breast by one flipper while swimming with the other, the heads of both being above water, and when suddenly disturbed, diving and displaying her fish-like tail. These, together with her habitual demonstrations of strong natural affection, might readily give rise to the fable of the mermaid. I won't even attempt that name. Megasthenes records the existence of a creature in the ocean near Taprobane, Ceylon, with the aspects of a woman, and Elian, adopting and enlarging on his information, peoples the seas of Ceylon with fishes, having the heads of lions, panthers, and rams, and stranger still, in the form of satyrs. Statements such as these must have had their origin in the hairs which are set round the mouth of the dugong, somewhat resembling a beard. The Portuguese cherished for a long time their belief in the mermaid, and the historian of the proceedings of the Jesuits in India gravely records that 7 of these monsters, male and female, were captured at Ceylon and carried to Goa, where they were dissected by the physician to the viceroy, and their internal structure found to be in all respects similar to the human. A dugong killed at Ceylon in 1847 measured upwards of 7 feet in length, but specimens considerably larger have been taken. The female dugong or sea cow of Sumatra will follow her young to the death and is usually taken with them. The sea calves have a short, sharp, piteous cry, which they frequently repeat, and like the stricken deer, are also said to shed tears, which, according to Sir Stamford Raffles, were carefully blotted by the common people. Carefully bottled. Now this is good. Let's read that again. The sea calves have a short, sharp, piteous cry, which they frequently repeat, and like the stricken deer are also said to shed tears, which, according to Sir Stamford Raffles, were carefully bottled by the common people and preserved as charms to secure affection. And that's the end of that. Oh, there are sea dragons too. Maybe I'll read that next. The sea dragon, huge sea lizards. All right, I'll read that next. Goodbye.